Dog won't stop barking at military drone. Police arrive and make a discovery that shocks the army. The morning sun cast long shadows across Atlanta's Piedmont Park as Sarah Collins watched her K9 partner Max's ears suddenly prick forward. In their 5 years together, she had never seen the Belgian Malinois so fixated on something in the sky. His muscles tensed beneath the tactical vest, and before she could process what was happening, Max let out a series of sharp, aggressive barks that echoed through the quiet morning air. "Max, quiet!" Sarah commanded, her hand instinctively moving to the dog's harness. But for the first time since their partnership began, Max ignored her order completely. His amber eyes remained locked on a military drone cutting through the crisp autumn sky, its sleek frame barely visible against the cloud cover. Sarah had seen dozens of drones before. They were a common sight around Atlanta's military installations, but something about this one had triggered an unprecedented response in her typically disciplined partner. Max's barking intensified, his powerful body straining against the harness as he tracked the drone's movement with unwavering focus. The early morning joggers and dog walkers who usually filled the park had stopped to stare. Sarah felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Max was known throughout the department for his impeccable training. She'd spent countless hours working with him, fine-tuning their communication until they could practically read each other's thoughts. This behavior was completely out of character. "Officer Collins!" A sharp voice cut through Max's barking. Sarah turned to see Technical Sergeant James Martinez striding toward them, his face tight with barely contained anger. "Get your dog under control. That drone is part of a classified military operation." Sarah tightened her grip on Max's harness, but the dog continued to bark, his behavior becoming more agitated with each passing second. "He's never acted like this before, Sergeant. Max is one of our most disciplined—" "I don't care about his record," Martinez interrupted, his hand sliding to the security badge on his chest. "That drone carries sensitive equipment. Your dog's barking could interfere with its sensors. Remove him from the area immediately." Something in Martinez's tone set off warning bells in Sarah's mind. She'd worked enough cases to know when someone was trying too hard to control a situation. Max's behavior, though unusual, wasn't random. She'd learned to trust his instincts almost as much as her own. The morning breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and something else, the faint odor of burning electronics. Sarah's nostrils flared as she caught the same smell that had likely triggered Max's response. The drone was flying lower now, its engines emitting a high-pitched whine that seemed slightly off-pitch from the usual military drones. "Of course, Sergeant," Sarah replied smoothly, masking her suspicion. "We'll clear the area." But as she guided Max away, she noticed something odd about the drone's flight pattern. Instead of following the standard route toward the nearby military base, it was making irregular loops over civilian areas, particularly concentrated around the high-rise buildings that housed several tech companies. Back in their patrol car, Sarah pulled out her tablet and accessed the day's drone flight schedules. After 5 minutes of searching, she found what she was looking for, or rather, what she wasn't finding. There were no authorized military drone operations scheduled over Piedmont Park that morning. She glanced at Max in the rearview mirror, his eyes still tracking the drone through the windshield, body rigid with attention. Sarah's mind raced back through their training sessions. Max had originally come from a specialized military program before being transferred to the Atlanta Police Department's K9 unit. His file had been surprisingly thin for a military-trained dog, with several sections redacted. At the time, she hadn't thought much about it. Military bureaucracy often worked in mysterious ways, but now those missing details nagged at her consciousness. The radio crackled to life. "All units in the vicinity of Piedmont Park, be advised. Military training exercise in progress. Clear all civilian and law enforcement personnel from the area." Sarah's hand froze on Max's head. The voice belonged to Martinez, but the order hadn't come through the official military channels. She pulled up the Joint Operations database on her laptop, No training exercise had been logged for today. Standard protocol required all military operations in civilian areas to be coordinated with local law enforcement at least 48 hours in advance. The drone made another pass overhead, and this time Sarah noticed something else, a subtle modification to its cargo bay that didn't match standard military specifications. She'd spent enough time around military equipment to spot the difference. Whatever this drone was carrying, it wasn't standard issue. "Looks like we've got some digging to do, partner," she murmured to Max, who had finally settled but maintained a low growl. "Whatever's going on with that drone, you spotted it first, and I've learned to never ignore your instincts." As Sarah started the engine, she caught movement in her rearview mirror. Martinez was on his phone, gesturing animatedly while staring at their departing vehicle. She made a mental note of his badge number and the drone's markings, then pulled up the contact information for her old friend in the FBI's cybersecurity division. If her suspicions were correct, this was far bigger than a simple unauthorized drone flight. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that this morning's incident would soon pull her and Max into a conspiracy that would test not only their partnership, but their very survival. The drone above Piedmont Park wasn't just off course. It was the first piece of a puzzle that would shake the foundations of national security itself. As they drove away from the park, Sarah glanced at Max once more. His eyes met hers in the mirror, filled with the same determination she felt growing in her chest. Whatever they had stumbled upon, they would face it together, just as they had every challenge for the past 5 years. The bond between them wasn't just a partnership. It was an unshakable trust that was about to become their greatest asset in the dangerous days ahead. The fluorescent lights of the Atlanta Police Department's K9 unit office buzzed overhead as Sarah hunched over her computer, scrolling through drone flight patterns from the past month. Max lay at her feet, his chin resting on her boot, but his ears remained alert. It was nearly midnight, and they were the only ones left in the building, exactly how Sarah wanted it. "Look at this, Max," she murmured, pulling up a satellite map. Red lines crisscrossed the screen, showing the unauthorized drone's flight paths. It's been mapping something. But what? The pattern was subtle. If she hadn't been looking for it, she might have missed it entirely. The drone had been making systematic passes over specific areas of Atlanta, government buildings, tech companies, and, most concerning, critical infrastructure sites. A soft whine from Max drew her attention to the office door. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, accompanied by the jingling of keys. Sarah quickly switched her screen to a routine report and pretended to be finishing paperwork as Officer Mike Thompson, the night shift supervisor, poked his head in. "Collins? Didn't expect to see you here this late." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Everything okay?" "Just catching up on reports," Sarah replied, scratching Max behind the ears. "You know how it piles up?" Thompson nodded, but something in his expression made Sarah uneasy. "Right. Well, don't stay too late. And hey, heard about the incident in the park this morning. Drone stuff, right? Military's pretty sensitive about their toys." "Just a routine matter," Sarah said casually, but she noticed how Thompson's eyes lingered on her computer screen. After he left, Sarah waited 5 minutes before pulling up her research again. She'd spent the afternoon making discreet inquiries about Technical Sergeant Martinez, and what she'd found, or rather, hadn't found, was troubling. His military credentials checked out, but there were gaps in his service record that made no sense. Max suddenly stood up, his body tense. A moment later, Sarah heard it too, the distinctive whir of a drone, much closer than it should be. She moved to the window, Max at her heel, and peered out into the darkness. There, hovering just beyond the parking lot, was the same drone from the morning. "They're watching us," Sarah whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her service weapon. The drone's presence here, at this hour, confirmed her suspicions. This was no routine surveillance. Max's low growl turned into a sharp bark as the drone suddenly accelerated, heading east toward the industrial district. Sarah grabbed her keys and radio. "Come on, boy. Let's see where our friend is going." They took Sarah's unmarked car, following the drone at a distance. The streets were nearly empty at this hour, making it easier to track the aircraft's movement without being spotted. After 15 minutes, the drone descended toward an abandoned warehouse complex near the railroad tracks. Sarah parked in the shadows of an old loading dock, her heart pounding. "Stay close," she whispered to Max as they exited the vehicle. The warehouse loomed before them, its broken windows like dark eyes watching their approach. As they neared the building, Max's behavior changed. His nose worked overtime, and his muscles bunched beneath his tactical vest. Sarah recognized the signs. He'd caught a scent. Following his lead, they moved around the perimeter until they found a side door, slightly ajar. The warehouse interior was pitch black. Sarah clicked on her tactical flashlight, keeping the beam low. The space was filled with old machinery and shipping containers, creating a maze of metal and shadows. Max moved with purpose, leading her deeper into the building. Suddenly, voices echoed from somewhere ahead. Sarah killed her light and pressed against a container, Max perfectly still beside her. The voices grew clearer. One of them was Martinez. "The modifications are complete," a man with a slight accent was saying. "The drones can now bypass standard detection systems. We'll be ready for the primary target within the week." "The local police aren't a concern," Martinez replied, "but there's a K9 unit that could be problematic. The dog somehow detected the alterations this morning." Sarah's breath caught. The other man swore softly. "Eliminate them. We can't risk—" A metallic clang from somewhere behind Sarah cut through the conversation. Max's head whipped around, and Sarah felt her blood run cold. They weren't alone. Before she could react, floodlights blazed to life, filling the warehouse with harsh white light. Sarah's eyes struggled to adjust as shouts erupted around them. Through the glare, she saw armed figures converging from multiple directions. "Max, find cover!" Sarah commanded, drawing her weapon as the first shots rang out. They dove behind a stack of metal drums as bullets pinged off the container behind them. Sarah keyed her radio, but only static answered. They were being jammed. In the chaos, she caught a glimpse of Martinez and his companion fleeing through a back door. More attackers were closing in, their footsteps echoing off the warehouse walls. Sarah knew they had seconds to make a decision. "Max, we're getting out of here," she whispered, gauging the distance to the nearest exit. The door was 30 feet away with minimal cover between. It would have to do. Sarah fired 2 shots to keep their attackers' heads down, then sprinted for the exit, Max right beside her. They burst out into the cool night air as bullets chewed up the doorframe behind them. But instead of finding safety, they emerged into an ambush. 3 more armed figures waited in the alley, weapons raised. "Don't move," one of them ordered. "It's over, Officer Collins." Sarah's mind raced. They were trapped, outgunned, and no one knew where they were. But as she looked down at Max, she saw no fear in his amber eyes, only unwavering trust and determination. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The night air crackled with tension as Sarah raised her hands slowly, buying time, waiting for an opening. They had stumbled onto something massive, something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. And now, in this dark alley behind an abandoned warehouse, she and Max would have to fight their way out, or die trying. Thunder rumbled in the distance, promising a storm. Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. They had no idea what a cornered K9 officer and her partner were capable of. The real storm was about to begin. Lightning split the sky as Sarah locked eyes with the armed men surrounding them. Rain began to fall, drumming against the metal walls of the warehouse. In that moment, her mind flashed back to her first day with Max, when he'd saved her life during what should have been a routine training exercise. "Last chance, Collins," the lead gunman called out. "Stand down and hand over the dog." Sarah's fingers twitched near her service weapon. "Max isn't going anywhere." The rain was falling harder now, reducing visibility. "Perfect. Focus," she whispered, knowing Max would pick up the command. It was their signal, practiced countless times in training. What these men didn't know was that Max wasn't just any police dog. He was a product of the military's classified Project Echo, trained to detect and respond to electronic signatures, a fact that had been conveniently redacted from his transfer papers. "Take them," the leader ordered. But before his men could move, Sarah dropped a flashbang from her sleeve. Max was already moving, anticipating her next command. "Lights!" The flashbang detonated, amplified by the rain's slick surfaces. In the chaos that followed, Max launched himself at the nearest attacker, while Sarah rolled behind a dumpster, coming up firing. Her first 2 shots found their marks, dropping 2 of the gunmen with non-lethal wounds to their legs. Max's military training showed in his precision. He didn't maul or savage. He disabled, targeting arms and legs with surgical accuracy. A skill Sarah had discovered during their first year together, when he'd taken down an armed suspect without leaving a single serious injury. Thunder crashed overhead as Sarah engaged the 3rd man, their struggle bringing them to the ground. She could hear Max dealing with the remaining attackers, his movements synchronized with the rhythm of combat they'd perfected over years of partnership. The leader tried to bring his weapon to bear, but Sarah trapped his arm, using a takedown move she'd learned in the academy. The impact drove the breath from his lungs. As she secured his hands with zip ties, she caught movement in her peripheral vision. Martinez, emerging from the shadows with a raised pistol. "Max, hi!" Sarah shouted. Without hesitation, Max abandoned his current target and leaped, intercepting Martinez's shot. The bullet struck a metal container behind them as Max's weight drove Martinez to the ground, sending his weapon skittering across the wet pavement. Sarah felt her heart stop for a moment, remembering another night, another shootout. She'd been a rookie K-9 officer then, responding to what was supposed to be a simple break-in. The suspect had been waiting, armed with military-grade weapons. Max had sensed the ambush before she did, pushing her out of the way of automatic fire. That night had cemented their bond, turning them from partners into family. Now, 5 years later, that same trust was saving their lives again. Sarah secured Martinez, while Max kept him pinned, the rain washing away blood from minor cuts and scrapes they'd sustained in the fight. "You have no idea what you're involved in," Martinez spat, struggling against the restraints. "I know enough," Sarah replied, retrieving his dropped phone. The screen was cracked but still functional. "And now I have proof." A quick search through Martinez's recent files revealed what they'd suspected: detailed plans for using modified military drones to bypass security at key installations. The conspiracy was bigger than they'd imagined, involving not just rogue military personnel, but foreign agents. Distant sirens pierced the storm's fury. Someone must have heard the gunfire and called it in. Sarah had seconds to decide their next move. The smart play would be to wait for backup, let the system handle it, but she'd been a cop long enough to know that conspiracies this big usually had roots in places backup couldn't reach. "Come on, Max," she said, downloading the files to her secure cloud storage. "We need to move." They couldn't risk staying until other officers arrived, not when they didn't know how deep the corruption went. As they ran through the rain-soaked alleys, Sarah's mind wandered back to Max's training files. The redacted sections, the mysterious military program, his unusual ability to detect electronic anomalies, it all connected to whatever these people were planning with the drones. They reached her unmarked car, just as another roll of thunder shook the night. Max jumped into the back seat, shaking water from his fur. Despite the cuts and bruises, his eyes were alert, focused, ready for whatever came next. Sarah started the engine, her hands steady on the wheel. The flash drive she'd taken from Martinez's phone felt heavy in her pocket. "Good boy," she said softly, meeting Max's eyes in the rearview mirror. "We're not done yet, are we?" Max's soft whine was all the answer she needed. They'd crossed a line tonight, stumbled onto something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. But as Sarah navigated through the stormy streets of Atlanta, she felt a fierce pride. Whatever they faced next, they would face it together. The rain began to ease as they drove, but the thunder continued its ominous rumble. Something was coming, something bigger than rogue drones and warehouse ambushes. Sarah's only certainty was the unwavering presence of her partner, watching the night through rain-streaked windows, ready to face whatever morning would bring. She pulled out her phone, scrolling to a number she rarely used. If they were going to survive this, they'd need help from someone who understood the world of classified military projects and international intrigue. Someone who knew the real story behind Max's mysterious past. "Hold tight, partner," Sarah murmured as she pressed dial. "I think it's time we found out what Project Echo was really about." The safe house was a modest bungalow on the outskirts of Atlanta, its peeling paint and overgrown lawn perfect camouflage for a CIA meeting point. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee, while Max lay alert at her feet. Across from her, retired CIA agent David Chen studied Martinez's phone files with growing concern. "I always knew Echo would come back to haunt us," Chen said, pushing his laptop away. "Your partner there, he's not just any military dog, Sarah. He's the only survivor of Project Echo's final phase." Lightning flickered through the windows. The storm had followed them across the city. Sarah glanced down at Max, seeing him in a new light. What exactly was Project Echo? Chen's weathered face tightened. A classified program to create K9 units capable of detecting and responding to electronic warfare. "We engineered their sensory capabilities to detect subtle electromagnetic signatures, frequency variations, radiation patterns, things no normal dog could perceive. And that's why Max reacted to the drone," Sarah said, pieces clicking into place. "He sensed something wrong with its electronics." "Exactly." Chen pulled up a classified file on his laptop. The program was shut down after most of the dogs developed severe neurological issues. Max was different. His enhanced abilities stabilized, but before we could understand why, someone sabotaged the facility. A fire destroyed everything. Max was the only dog that made it out. Sarah remembered the gaps in Max's service record. And that's when he was transferred to the Atlanta PD? We needed to hide him in plain sight. A regular police K9 unit was perfect cover. Chen's expression darkened. But now, Martinez and his people know what Max can do. Those modified drones you discovered, they're just the beginning. A sudden bark from Max made them both jump. He was staring intently at Chen's laptop, hackles raised. Chen's eyes widened. "Get down!" Sarah dove for cover as the windows exploded inward. A small drone, barely larger than a dinner plate, hovered in the kitchen, its camera eye scanning the room. Max lunged toward it, but the drone dodged with impossible agility. "They tracked my access to the classified files," Chen shouted, drawing a concealed weapon. "Sarah, get Max out of here. If they capture him—" The drone released a high-pitched electronic pulse. Chen's laptop sparked and died. Max yelped in pain, shaking his head violently. Sarah's police radio erupted in static. More drones appeared at the windows as Sarah grabbed Max's tactical vest, pulling him toward the back door. The sound of approaching vehicles filled the air. "Chen, come on!" But the retired agent was already moving to the front of the house, his weapon ready. "I'll hold them off. There's a secure server at Emory University. Dr. Rebecca Torres, Cybersecurity Division. She helped design Project Echo. Find her." Sarah wanted to argue, but Max's increasing distress made the decision for her. The electronic pulses were affecting him, his enhanced senses overwhelmed by the drone's attacks. They burst through the back door into the rain-soaked yard as gunfire erupted from the front of the house. They made it to Sarah's car just as armed figures began pouring around the sides of the bungalow. The engine roared to life as bullets pinged off the reinforced body. Through her rearview mirror, Sarah caught a final glimpse of Chen providing covering fire from the doorway before the night swallowed him. Max lay in the back seat, still shaking off the effects of the electronic attack. Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel as they sped through the darkness. She'd gotten him into this by following her suspicions about the drone. Now his secret was exposed, and powerful people wanted what he could do. "We'll find Torres," she promised, reaching back to touch his head. "We'll figure this out, partner, together." The university was across town, and Sarah knew their enemies would be watching the obvious routes. But she hadn't spent 5 years as a K-9 officer without learning every back alley and service road in Atlanta. They would make it. They had to. Her phone buzzed with an incoming text. Unknown number. Echo assets compromised. Torres in danger. They're moving on primary target within 24 hours. Sarah's mind raced. The drone modifications, the coordinated attacks, the urgency to capture Max. It was all connected to something bigger, something about to happen in Atlanta. As they drove through the rain-slicked streets, Sarah thought about everything she'd learned. Max wasn't just a police dog. He was a living testament to a classified military program, engineered to detect threats that no human could perceive. It explained his extraordinary abilities, his perfect record on electronic detection cases, and why certain parts of his file had been redacted. A quick glance in the rearview mirror showed Max recovering his composure. Despite everything that had happened, the revelation of his origins, the attack at the safe house, the loss of Chen, he remained focused and alert, ready to continue their mission, just as he'd always been. Sarah took a sharp turn down a narrow alley, cutting through the industrial district. They needed to reach Dr. Torres before their enemies did. If Project Echo was as groundbreaking as Chen suggested, then Max might be the only thing standing between these people and whatever catastrophe they were planning. The storm intensified as they wound their way through the city's shadows. Tomorrow would bring either answers or annihilation, but tonight, in the rain and darkness, Sarah had only one certainty: the remarkable dog in her back seat. The partner who had never let her down would see this through with her to the end. She checked her weapon and Max's tactical vest. Dawn was still hours away, and their enemies were closing in from all sides. But together, they had faced impossible odds before. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything else, as partners, as friends, as family. The rain drummed against the car roof as they disappeared into the maze of Atlanta's back streets. Somewhere ahead, Dr. Torres held answers about Max's past and the conspiracy's true purpose. Time was running out, and the storm showed no signs of breaking. Emory University's cybersecurity center loomed dark and silent against the pre-dawn sky. Sarah crouched behind a maintenance van, watching as 2 armed men patrolled the building's entrance. Max tensed beside her, his enhanced senses already picking up the electronic signatures of more drones nearby. "They beat us here," Sarah whispered, checking her watch. 4:15 a.m., less than an hour until sunrise, and somewhere inside, Dr. Torres held the key to unraveling this conspiracy, if she was still alive. A soft whine from Max drew her attention upward. 3 small drones circled the building's upper floors, their modified sensors sweeping for any sign of movement. Sarah remembered how the electronic pulses had affected Max at the safe house. They couldn't risk another direct confrontation with the drones. Her phone vibrated. Another text from the unknown number. "Torres alive, level 3, secure lab, hurry." Sarah studied the building's layout on her tablet. The secure lab would be protected by electronic locks and security systems that were probably compromised by now. But there was another way in. During her campus security training, she'd learned about the old maintenance tunnels that connected the university's original buildings. "Come on, boy," she whispered, leading Max toward a service entrance at the back of the building. The lock was electronic, but Sarah had come prepared. She pulled out a small device, courtesy of Chen's go bag from the safe house, and attached it to the keypad. Seconds later, the door clicked open. The service tunnel was narrow and damp, decades of water seepage creating small puddles on the concrete floor. Max moved silently ahead of her, his training allowing him to navigate the darkness with ease. Sarah kept one hand on her weapon, the other trailing the wall for guidance. They emerged into a basement storage area. Sarah checked her tablet again. The secure lab was 2 floors up. As they approached the stairwell, Max suddenly froze, ears forward. Sarah heard it too. voices from above, speaking in hushed tones. "The data transfer is almost complete," a woman's voice said. "Probably Dr. Torres, though she sounded stressed. But you don't understand what you're dealing with. Project Echo wasn't just about enhanced K9 units. The neurological modifications—" "Save your concerns for someone who cares," a familiar voice interrupted. "Martinez. Once we have the core programming, we can replicate the process. Imagine an army of drones with Echo's detection capabilities. No security system would be safe." Sarah's blood ran cold. They weren't just after Max. They wanted to use Project Echo's technology to create unstoppable surveillance drones. The implications for national security were catastrophic. Max's low growl snapped her back to the present. More footsteps were approaching from below. They were about to be trapped in the stairwell. Sarah made a quick decision. "Max, distraction," she whispered. It was a command they'd practiced but rarely used. Max would draw attention while she maneuvered into position. Max bounded up the stairs, his barking echoing through the building. Shouts of alarm erupted above them. Sarah used the chaos to slip through a side door, circling around to approach the secure lab from another direction. Through the windows, she could see Martinez and 3 armed men surrounding Dr. Torres at a computer terminal. The scientist was a small woman in her 50s, her silver hair disheveled, but her hands moved steadily over the keyboard. Max's barking grew louder, drawing 2 of the guards away from the lab. Sarah watched them rush past her hiding spot, leaving Martinez and 1 guard with Torres. The odds were improving, but they had to move fast. A sudden crash from below made everyone jump. One of the guards screamed. Max had found his target. Martinez grabbed Torres roughly. "Finish the transfer, now!" Sarah checked her weapon and took a deep breath. They would only get 1 chance at this. She keyed her radio, hoping the police bandwidth was still secure. "This is Officer Collins. Officer needs assistance at Emory University Cybersecurity Center. Armed suspects, possible hostage situation." Even if backup was compromised, the distraction of the call would buy them precious seconds. Sarah reached for a flashbang grenade, her last one, and waited for Max's signal. She didn't have to wait long. Max's distinctive warning bark echoed through the hallway, followed by the sound of shattering glass. The remaining guard turned toward the noise, and Sarah made her move. The flashbang rolled into the lab, and Sarah shielded her eyes. The explosion of light and sound was instantaneous. She burst through the door as Max crashed through a window on the opposite side, executing the pincer movement they'd perfected over years of training. Martinez recovered quickly, shoving Torres aside and raising his weapon. But Max was faster, launching himself at the man's arm with surgical precision. Sarah dealt with the disoriented guard, her years of close-quarters combat training making the difference. Within seconds, both men were down. Sarah secured them with zip ties while Max stood guard. Dr. Torres stared at them in amazement, her eyes fixed on Max. "It's really him," she whispered. "The only success we ever had. You have no idea what they were planning to do with the technology." "Tell me," Sarah said, checking Martinez's restraints. "Tell me everything." But before Torres could answer, Max's head snapped toward the windows. The electronic whine of approaching drones filled the air, growing louder by the second. Sarah's heart sank as she saw them. Not 3 or 4 drones, but dozens, their modified sensors glowing in the pre-dawn darkness. The real fight was about to begin. The drones swarmed outside the lab windows like angry hornets, their electronic signatures causing Max visible distress. "Doctor," Torres rushed to her computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. "We have to shut down the network," she said urgently. "These drones, they're not just modified for surveillance. They're carrying Project Echo's neural interface technology. If they sync with the mainframe..." A burst of gunfire cut her off as more of Martinez's men stormed the lab. Sarah pulled Torres behind a heavy desk, while Max positioned himself between them and the attackers. "The data transfer," Martinez called out from his restrained position. "It's already done. Echo's core programming is being uploaded to every drone in their network. You can't stop it now." Sarah watched in horror as the drones outside began moving with new precision, their formations becoming more complex, more intelligent. Through the windows, she could see more drones rising from hidden locations around the campus, joining the swarm. "They're not just drones anymore," Torres explained, her voice shaking. "The neural interface, it lets them learn, adapt. They're becoming a hive mind, and once they sync with military networks, they could bypass any security system in the country," Sarah finished. "But Max can detect them. That's why they wanted him." Torres nodded. He was the only subject whose brain successfully merged with the Echo enhancements. His neural patterns are the key to the whole system. And now they've weaponized that technology. Max barked sharply as the drones pressed closer to the windows. Sarah could see the strain in his posture as their combined electronic signatures assaulted his enhanced senses. "There has to be a way to stop them," Sarah insisted, returning fire as more of Martinez's men tried to breach the lab. Torres's eyes lit up. "Max's neural pattern. It's still the base code for the whole system. If we could use him to transmit a shutdown signal..." She turned back to her computer. "But the feedback could kill him." Sarah looked at her partner. Max met her gaze steadily, and she saw in his eyes what she always saw. Absolute trust, unwavering courage. He'd already made his decision. "Do it," Sarah ordered, her heart breaking. "Max, guard." As Torres worked, Sarah provided covering fire. The drones had begun breaking through the windows, their electronic pulses growing stronger. Max stood his ground, fighting through the pain of their combined signatures. "It's ready," Torres announced, "but he'll need to be closer to the main swarm. The signal has to reach their central processing unit." Sarah nodded grimly. "Max, with me." They moved toward the broken windows, ducking under fire from both human attackers and drones. The sunrise was just beginning to paint the sky, casting everything in a surreal golden light. "Martinez was right about one thing," Torres called out, initiating the program. Project Echo was about creating something revolutionary, but he forgot the most important part, the bond between handler and dog. That's what made Max special. That's what made him survive. The drones pressed closer, drawn to Max's neural signature. Sarah stood beside him, one hand firmly on his tactical vest. "Together, partner, just like always." Torres hit the final key, and Max raised his head, letting out a long, clear bark that seemed to pierce through the electronic chaos. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Sarah felt it, a pulse of energy that made her hair stand on end. The drones froze mid-air, their formations breaking apart. One by one, their lights flickered and died. They fell from the sky like metal rain, crashing harmlessly to the ground. In the sudden silence, Sarah heard police sirens approaching. Max swayed on his feet, and Sarah caught him as his legs buckled. "Stay with me, boy," she whispered, cradling his head. "Stay with me." His eyes fluttered, but then his tail thumped weakly against the floor. Slowly, steadily, his breathing strengthened. Torres knelt beside them, checking him over with tears in her eyes. "The shutdown worked," she said in amazement, "and he's stabilizing. The bond between you, it must have helped him survive the feedback." The lab filled with FBI agents and SWAT team members. Martinez and his men were taken into custody. As the sun rose fully over Atlanta, Sarah learned the full scope of what they'd prevented, a plot to use the modified drones to infiltrate military installations across the country. Hours later, in the calm of her apartment, Sarah watched Max sleeping peacefully in his bed. The FBI had spent the day debriefing them, and Project Echo's files were now secured. Torres had been offered a position heading a new cybersecurity division, with Max and Sarah as special consultants. Max's eyes opened, meeting hers with the same steady trust she'd seen in that first training session 5 years ago. He wasn't just a product of Project Echo, not just a military experiment. He was her partner, her protector, her family. "Good boy," she whispered, and his tail thumped against the floor. Outside, Atlanta was waking up to a normal day, unaware of how close they'd come to disaster, but Sarah knew that as long as she and Max were together, their city, their home, would be safe. Project Echo had tried to create the perfect weapon. Instead, they'd created something far more powerful, a bond between handler and dog that could overcome any obstacle, face any threat. And as Max rested his head on her lap, Sarah knew that was a legacy worth protecting.